Good morning, everyone. My name is Natalia Gutierrez. I am a coach at Colombia. And today we'll be presenting on our efforts over the past year to extend the acute skin action spectrum to include the Far-UVC wavelengths. Exposure of the skin to UV radiation is known to trigger an array of physiological effects that are known to depend on exposure wavelength, dose, and skin type. These physiological effects are known to either develop immediately after radiation, which can lead to the development of erythema, which is when redness develops on that exposed area of the skin due to an increased blood flow to that spot of the skin. It can also lead to the inflammation of the skin, which it forms in combination with erythema. It creates what we know as sunburn, or it can trigger the peeling or scaling of the outermost layer of the skin, known as the stratum corneum. With more chronic irradiation, it can lead to a gradual development over time of more irreversible effects, such as the accelerated aging of the skin, or more serious diseases as melanoma and non-melanoma skin cancer. Due to this, an array of national and international organizations have developed guidelines on exposure limits based on what a person can be safely exposed to in an 8-hour workday and 40-hour work week without developing any of these acute or long-term effects on your skin and eyes. These exposure limits are informed based on an array of photobiological action spectrum, including the erythema action spectrum that was developed in 1998 by the International Commission on Illumination. In 2022, the ACGIH raised the limits for wavelengths below 230 nanometers, and separated the limits for skin and eyes for wavelengths below 300 nanometers for cases where the eyes are protected by the skin is exposed. Unfortunately, none of the photobiological action spectrum that is informed these limits have been updated to include the Far-UVC. Therefore, we're unsure if these new limits are safe for humans or they could still remain overly conservative and could be raised higher. Therefore, we take a first step at extending this action spectrum by starting with the erythema action spectrum, by performing exposure studies on the albino hairless stage 1 mice model, which we exposed to an array of 5 to 6 increasing doses in the dorsal side of the mice, to which 2 members of our team performed evaluations 24, 48, and 72 hours after exposure for the development of erythema, edema, scales, and fissures. We did not only look for erythema, as previous skin studies that looked at the effect that 2 to 2 nanometer light has on the skin observed that scaling formed instead of erythema when exposing at high doses of 2 to 2 nanometer light, suggesting that erythema may not be the most accurate skin point to look at the effect that this radiation has on the skin. We perform irradiations with the use of a monochromator, performing exposures starting at 200 nanometers up to 270 nanometers in 5 nanometer increments, where we make use of a narrow bandwidth emission, where we use a bandwidth of 2 nanometers for all wavelengths, excluding the 200 nanometer exposure, where we use 4 nanometers. The purpose of this study was to determine the threshold exposure dose, which is the highest dose at each of these wavelengths that did not trigger the development of any acute responses. We performed this study in 2 stages. The first stage, we made use of 1 mouse, which we exposed to increasing doses, a total of 6 doses, based on the exposure limits set by the ICNRP. We performed these exposure doses based on 2 times, 4 times, 8 times, 16 times, and 32 times of this exposure limit. The purpose of this stage was to determine the rough estimated threshold dose, which is the highest dose that did not trigger a response. Once we determined this threshold dose, we based our second study, was our base for the second stage, where we use a cohort of 8 mice for each of these wavelengths. We perform more narrow exposure doses so that we could be it could help us to determine more accurately this threshold dose at each of the exposure wavelengths. Once we obtained all of the evaluation time points, the evaluation at all of the stages and all of the different time points, we used them to develop a logistic regression model that took into account the variability of responses between all of these mice. And we use this model to predict the effect that all of our exposure doses and exposure wavelengths had at triggering a response. And we compared these predicted effects to the mean of the skin evaluation results. Once we determined that our model accurately predicts the effect all of these wavelengths had on my skin, and we attributed the difference in fit due to random effects, we use this model to predict the dose that would trigger a response 50% of the time. For wavelengths between 200 and 250 nanometers, we noticed that these predicted doses were actually extrapolations, as in a moment in our study, it's the top squares, we exposed our mice to any doses that had a response 50% of the time. Based on these doses that our model predicted, it revealed an increasing response for wavelengths found in the Far-UVC, where this increasing response started to become revealed at 240 nanometers. Based on this mouse acute skin action spectrum, it suggests that the limits set by the ACGIH in 2022 for the skin may actually be overly conservative for wavelengths below 230 nanometers, as our model predicts that for 222 nanometers, it requires a dose of 1,162 to trigger a response 50% of the time, which is almost twice as much as where the limit is set at the moment. Even though our mouse acute skin action spectrum does not directly inform into the safety that this radiation has on human skin, it provides very valuable information into establish its safety. These doses that we're reporting here is valuable data that we can use to test acute human skin exposure trials. In this study, we provide the most comprehensive analysis of the spectrum of the skin to active response for UVC exposures, as we take proper consideration on the spectral bandwidth, and we make use of narrow bandwidth exposures, where we make sure there is minimal contribution of stray radiation. We extend the mouse acute skin action spectrum to include the Far-UVC wavelengths, which suggests that these wavelengths may not be as efficient at triggering an acute skin response in mice. Our mouse acute skin action spectrum suggests that the revised DLBs in 2022 for the skin may still remain overly conservative, and in combination with the studies and future chronic studies, it provides and informs on potential health risks and acceptable threshold doses that we can use this radiation for. I would like to thank the members of our team that were key for our studies, as well as all collaborators whose input was also key. Thank you.